Everyone assumes money buys safety. More money, more armor, more distance between you and disaster. For most of human history, that was true. But there have been a handful of moments, brief, specific windows in time when that entire equation flipped. Moments where the single most dangerous thing you could own wasn't a weapon, wasn't an enemy, wasn't even an opinion. It was a bank account. We're going to walk through 4 of the worst possible times to be rich in human history, each one worse than the last, and end with the one period so brutal that simply looking wealthy could get you killed before you said a single word. Rome, 82 BC. You are a senator. You own estates, slaves, a townhouse on the Palatine Hill. Rome has just finished tearing itself apart in a civil war, and the winner, a general named Sulla, is now dictator in all but name. You didn't fight against him, you didn't fight for him either, you stayed home, which you assumed made you safe. Then a friend arrives at your door, pale, out of breath. Have you seen the forum today? No, why? Go look, your name is on the wall. You don't understand at first. Sulla has published a list, a proscription, of citizens declared enemies of the state. Anyone on it can be killed by anyone for any reason, no trial required. Their head, brought to the authorities, earns a cash reward. Their property is auctioned off immediately, usually to whoever turned them in. That's absurd. I've never opposed him. I've barely left my house in a year. It doesn't matter. Someone wanted your vineyard. That was the terrifying genius of the proscriptions. The lists weren't really about politics. Historians would later note that plenty of names on them belonged to men with no enemies at all, just men with property that somebody else wanted and a friend in the right office willing to add a name to a scroll. You spend that night deciding whether to run, bribe a guard, or wait it out. Thousands of wealthy Romans made the same calculation. Many didn't survive to regret their choice either way. By the time the proscriptions ended, roughly 2,000 of Rome's wealthiest men were dead, and their fortunes had changed hands overnight. It was a strange new rule of the ancient world. The more you owned, the higher the bounty on your head. Rome eventually calmed down. Fortunes rebuilt. If you'd been born a little earlier or a little later, you'd been fine. That's rule number 1 of a bad time to be rich. The danger has an expiration date. The next one didn't. Paris, 1793. You are a nobleman, though you've started asking servants not to use that word anymore. The revolution has already taken the king's head, and the National Convention has just passed something called the Law of Suspects. It doesn't require evidence, it doesn't require an accusation of a specific crime, it only requires that a tribunal suspect you might be disloyal to the Republic, which, if you own a chateau, employ servants, or simply speak too formally, is not difficult to arrange. A summons arrives. You're brought before the Revolutionary Tribunal. State your occupation. I manage my family's estates, meaning you live off the labor of others. I employ people. I pay wages. You employed people, past tense now since your estates were seized this morning. On what charge? Wealth, under present circumstances, is itself considered suspicious. Do you deny you are wealthy? You don't answer. There's no answer that helps you. The trials moved fast, sometimes dozens of names processed in a single afternoon, because the guillotine outside was already scheduled for the day. Roughly 17,000 people were formally executed during the terror's peak, and historians estimate several times that many died in prisons or in the chaos surrounding it. A meaningful share of them weren't political enemies of the revolution at all. They were simply people whose property, title, or manner of dress made a hungry crowd or a suspicious tribunal decide they belonged to the wrong side of history. At least in Rome, you could try to bribe your way off a list. In Paris, the list wasn't written by one dictator you could negotiate with. It was written by an entire mood. And moods don't take bribes. Petrograd, 1918. You own a textile shop, 3 warehouses, and a modest townhouse your grandfather built. The Tsar is gone. The Bolsheviks are in charge, and Lenin has just survived an assassination attempt. The response is swift. The government declares what it openly calls the Red Terror, targeting what it labels class enemies, a category that, inconveniently for you, includes anyone who owns a business.
A commissar arrives at your shop with 2 armed men and a clipboard. We're here to conduct an inventory. An inventory of what? Everything. It belongs to the people now. You are welcome to continue managing it on behalf of the state at a wage we'll determine. This shop took my grandfather 20 years to build, and it will take the workers considerably less time to redistribute. You should be grateful. Some of your former customers wanted a different kind of conversation with you. That last line wasn't a joke. Wealthy merchants, former nobles, and bourgeois elements were rounded up by the thousands during this period. Some sent to labor camps, some simply shot as examples. Owning things wasn't just financially risky anymore. It was the entire charge sheet. Notice the pattern building. Rome at least still allowed you to hide, negotiate, or flee. Paris removed the negotiation. Petrograd removed the hiding place, because now the danger wasn't a mob or a tribunal, it was the government itself, and the government had a clipboard and your address. But even this had one small mercy. They wanted your assets. They still needed you, for a while, to run the machine you'd built. The next era wouldn't even want that. Shanghai, 1966. You own a small manufacturing plant your family has run for 2 generations. China is in the grip of what's being called the Cultural Revolution, and Chairman Mao has just called on the country's youth to root out anyone representing the old ways: landlords, capitalists, intellectuals. A group of teenagers in red armbands arrives at your gate. We're here to inspect your household for bourgeois elements. I run a small factory. I employ 40 people. 40 people you exploit for profit. Your neighbors have already confirmed you own imported furniture. It was a gift decades ago. Explanations are not requested. You'll come with us. There will be a meeting. The meeting was called a struggle session, a public event where the accused was made to kneel before a crowd, wear a sign listing their crimes, and confess to offenses that were often invented on the spot. Humiliation, beatings, and in a significant number of cases, death followed for those accused of being class enemies. Homes were ransacked, family heirlooms were burned in the street as symbols of the old world that needed erasing. Notice what's different this time. It's not a dictator's list. It's not a tribunal. It's not even the government's own agents with a clipboard. It's your neighbors, your students, the teenagers who used to buy candy from your shop, now standing at your gate with a list of your belongings because they've been told that punishing you is patriotic. That's a new, uglier ingredient. The danger isn't concentrated in one office anymore. It's distributed across an entire population, and almost anyone can accuse you. Which brings us to the answer. Because there was one place, one specific window where every single one of these ingredients combined all at once, and then added one final horrifying twist.
Cambodia, 1975. The Khmer Rouge has just taken control of the country, and they've declared this year zero, the complete, total erasure of the old society to build something entirely new. Here is what made this different from everything before it. In Rome, you were targeted for what you owned. In Paris and Petrograd, you were targeted for what you owned and who you were. In Shanghai, you were targeted for what you owned, who you were, and what your neighbors believed about you. In Cambodia, you didn't need to own anything at all. You just needed to look like you might have once. Soft hands, unmarked by field labor. A pair of eyeglasses. The ability to speak a foreign language or simply speak with an educated vocabulary. Any of these were treated as evidence that you belonged to the old targeted class: teachers, doctors, merchants, civil servants, anyone associated with the previous government or with wealth and education in general. There was no list posted in a forum, no tribunal to plead your case before, no inventory to negotiate. Cities were emptied within days, their populations marched into the countryside, and those identified as members of the old educated or wealthy class were separated out and, in an enormous number of cases, killed in what survivors and historians now refer to simply as the killing fields. Estimates vary, but historians generally agree that somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million people died during this roughly 4-year period, a substantial share of Cambodia's entire population at the time. That's the final, terrible escalation. Every earlier era at least required proof of wealth, a name on a scroll, a deed to a shop, a title to a chateau. In Cambodia, a clean pair of glasses was enough proof for a death sentence. This isn't a story to find dark comedy in, the way you might with a Roman senator haggling over a bribe. It's simply the most extreme version of a pattern that runs through every one of these eras. The moment a society decides that having more than your neighbor isn't just an inequality to resent, but a crime to be punished. Look back across all 4 stops on this list, and a single thread connects them. It was never really about the money itself. Coins don't threaten anyone sitting in a vault. It was about what the money represented to everyone standing outside the vault. Proof, real or imagined, that you had taken something that should have been theirs. Every one of these societies told itself the same story to justify what came next, that the wealthy weren't just fortunate, they were guilty. And once enough people believe that story at the same time, no fortress, no bribe, and no bloodline can keep you safe. Which leaves an uncomfortable question hanging over all of it. If wealth has been treated as a crime this many times across history, what makes anyone certain it won't happen again?